We're live. Yes, yes. So, good afternoon, good evening,
Hello,
Francisco.
everybody.
Hello, Francesco Piccinelli Casagrande. As always, we'll be speaking about data journalism. But today, since this is the probably the first our first meeting after 9/11 this year, we will talk about 9/11 and what 9/11 changed in data journalism. Because
Yeah,
Francesco, your last number of your newsletter is out. It's been out
yeah.
today, and I know that that was your topic this week. Am I right?
So the
Are you there?
topic
Yeah,
this
yeah.
week, the topic this week was essentially how the New York Times changed after 9/11, and in order to do that, I did something. I did something that I don't think has ever been done before, which is using the API by the New York Times. The New York Times have this website. I'm going to show you, which is called a developer portal, like the one from Twitter and from other companies, and they have a trove of data. They have plenty of data about the newspaper, and they also have another package that allows everybody to get data, to get the archive. They metadata for the entire archive of the New York Times, which is accessible. It's not very easy to access because they have some restriction, like the fact that you have to select specific months, and you cannot, let's say, vectorialize or how can I say, query the API programmatically. Nevertheless, I mean, I'm going to show you how do you interrogate the New York Times API, because it's absolutely fascinating, and it shows you also how important are data for companies nowadays. Um, so
So, so,
uh,
so, so,
I
so, so so they basically have an interface developers can use in order to get to suck in data and to use that
yeah.
for to do
So
analytics.
I didn't quite understand because the connection is a bit fuzzy, but I'm showing you what is this about. So I had to, for every year,
Yeah,
uh,
probably you
I
should
had
just a little bit increase the size,
yeah,
at least for
absolutely. There we
people.
go. There you go. So technically, it was a complete nightmare because uh, you see here,
Yeah,
when you interrogate the archive, you can only put year and month. Okay, you cannot write a sequence
yeah.
programmatically. You have to do it manually, and also you have a limited number of queries you can make in a specific time frame. So you have to download data in batches, and that means that you have to manually do this work for essentially every semester of every year, which means that you have to spend half of a day essentially querying the New York Times archive. Nevertheless,
Yeah, yeah. So just to understand here, what is going on. So you are just downloading month by month, right?
yeah,
The data,
yeah,
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 and you are
yeah.
building up
So
a data frame after that.
yeah, so no, I mean there is no way to do it faster. That's the problem,
Yeah,
and uh, yeah, and the thing is that you download it, you put it together, you build data sets and data sets on data frame after data frame. You end up having a massive data set. You see, I also made sure that there were bylines in this article, so to have, to save also some computational power, because consider that the analysis is on something like 1 million articles, 1,575,000 articles, and it's already a lot. So you have to reduce. And
So
I did
1 million
also
articles.
1,600,000
Articles.
articles, metadata articles. Yeah, metadata of 1,600,000 articles. This is
But
the dimension of the analysis.
that's a ton of articles. I mean, how many people wrote that many articles? I mean, it's over how many years? Just 20 years.
20 years. In 20 years, they produced this number of articles, and it is not all of them because I didn't download, like, articles they get from newswires and stuff which have no signature or something like that. So, I
So,
mean,
that's about 80, if I do, my math right, it's about 80,000 articles per year.
yeah, something like this. I'm
No,
showing
no,
you
no, no, no,
immediately.
no, no, so, yeah, no,
I,
that's it,
I'm
that's it, yeah.
I'm showing you immediately how many articles per day, because so you get so you can start
Yeah,
getting into
well, I
the
mean, it's in the same order magnitude of seconds. So they are putting out probably one article per second. But is that
they are publishing more than 100 articles per day. This is the average now, and it's closer to 200 than it is to 100 actually. And yeah, and the real thing is that they are producing less than they were 10 years ago. That's the main takeout from this newsletter, in my opinion. I think, because I mean, what this massive trove of data tells you is that after September 11, which essentially I use it as a symbol because September 11 has been probably the first global event covered by digital media in a modern way. And so I wanted to track down the changes in the New York Times, because it's the New York Times after that event. And what you see is that there had been one major turning point, which coincidentally is 10 years ago, when they decided to go for a paid version of the newspaper. They changed radically business model, and that implied that the organization of the newspaper and the production of content changed dramatically and accordingly. Because also, if you go to see also another more complicated chart, which is here we see how many uh, words on article words. We see the mean number of words per article issued daily. Okay, so we have a trend which is evident starting if we start observing after here, which is March 2011, and after that you see that slowly, and with different pace,
yeah,
the mean number of words per article grows on a daily basis. And now we have articles who are significantly longer than they were 20 years ago. And in the newsletter, I argue that it's not by chance, it's not by accident, because I think that after they changed business model, they had to produce higher quality content, which essentially meant longer articles, and to put more care in them, which meant essentially less articles.
yeah. But do we? Yeah, of course. So the number of words per day basically is the same as before, as it was before, because they are putting forth longer articles,
Yeah,
but yeah, but less less than before. So the product probably is the the product of articles and words per articles probably has been constant in, across these 20 years.
Yeah.
But let me ask you here: do we have, because you just say that they are trying to put more quality, more effort into these articles, and one clue about that is that the articles themselves are longer. But do we have
Yeah.
another kind of way to measure this quality? Because somebody else
Uh,
could just say that, less is more. I mean, longer articles doesn't necessarily imply, a higher quality.
I agree.
Yeah.
The problem is that there is not a way to measure quality in journalism. I mean, you can measure only the format, the length of article, how many articles you make. So you don't have let's say a quantitative proof of the fact that articles today
Yeah, of course we
have
don't.
an inherent higher quality than they had before.
Yeah,
What
yeah,
we can see though, what
yes,
what we can do though is try to use something like a proxy. And because I was making myself this consideration when I was looking at the data in the previous section of the newsletter, and the answer I had was another question actually, and the question was, uh, they want to do more news, all right? So let's go to see what kind of news, which were the sections that were responsible of the majority of content for the New York Times in the last 20 years. And what we find out is here. I don't know if you see the mouse pointer, but the mouse icon,
yeah.
but if you see blogs here, okay, you see that even if you don't know the outcome in terms of in terms of quality of articles by the New York Times, we still have um, a measurement of the fact that uh, a lot of that content was essentially crap and not news. And you already, and I think we saw it right now when the GIF was around 2008 and 2009, because
Did you just say crap? I mean,
crap, crap,
yeah,
yeah,
you mean,
I just
seriously, I
I
mean,
just I,
articles
I
in your
I
time?
just no, I'm categorizing as scrap
Oh, yes,
the
okay,
blogs, the blogs section of the New York Times between 2009, 2008,
okay,
2009. Because I mean, blogs were essentially opinion pieces where journalists were expressing themselves freely, and they were not essentially news. But the real thing, the real aim was to give advertisement a platform. You see here we have a monthly explosion of blog posts.
yeah,
And back then, if you remember, I mean, I remember very well because I was studying journalism in those years. And what you saw back then was a constant rush by publishers to have plenty of content, tons of content from their website, simply because they had to place advertisement on it. All right. So even if it is true that quality, we have no information in this by this newsletter on the quality of articles. We have information what about how the newsroom was working, because and in the mindset and in how the mindset of the newsroom changed after they introduced the paywall, because you see it again and again and again. 2009, you have an explosion of blog posts, which is essentially consistent also with what we saw here. You see, with the spikes in terms of articles published daily, okay?
yeah,
And, and at a point, you realize that this is not really the road you have to pursue. What you have to pursue is essentially to go to the root of the business, which is give people news and make people pay for it. All right. So
Yeah.
that's why you don't see any more spikes like this one, any more peaks like this one, and you see a very regular pattern that stabilize essentially during the Donald Trump's during Donald Trump's White House. That's why. So they evolved and they went to news, and I mean, and they decided to strive to give readers more quality and, or better, more newsy articles,
Yeah.
right? And that's
Uh,
something that you can see very well here. Uh,
and,
and
and,
also,
and yeah, yeah. Sorry, go on, please.
you have another indicator of this, which is the share of multimedia content they were publishing. In this newsletter, I argue that um, mm, until the end, until the beginning of the last decade, uh, because it was the end of the last, it was the beginning of the last decade that the decision was made. You had this thingy that it, it was like, you had on we were on two poles of we had to we had, Jordan was the crossroad. They had they it had to decide, we go towards opinion or we go towards news. And it was a very tricky choice because opinions are cheap, but news and new ways to present news are not cheap. They are very expensive, and and also doing data journalism is a hell of a work. I mean, it's
Yeah.
very complicated.
But
And
how? Where exactly do we set the line? Between news and opinions as far as data journalism is concerned. For example, this piece of
as,
yours is this
as
news or opinion?
is analysis, which is something in
It's
between, which is
yeah. So the let's say the yeah the border between the two worlds is
yeah
like blurred at the least.
yeah, but this cannot be categorized as an opinion post because it is replicable. And that's the real strength of this article, because I share the code and I show the data. But I mean, as far as they were concerned, um, you, you see that, you see very clear that the New York Times decided to go towards uh, news. Also, you have to add that multimedia journalism has very little to do with the opinion. It may report opinions, but the problem is that it has to be a work of a keep. Uh, and having a group with a consistent and stable opinion is something that is really more hypothetical than true, essentially, in my opinion. And that's why that's why this chart here is crucial, because it shows you that as blog posts decline, because you saw in the chart before, after 2010, essentially the blog section of the New York Times died. You had a constant, growth of multimedia content, which became experimental. You have days where 30% of the content is multimedia in the New York Times. But you see that in this aspect, the New York Times did two things. It kind of embraced multimedia, but it did it in a very prudent way. They didn't disrupt the newsroom to host new formats. They just adapted. They adapted knowing two things. Number one, that the reserves are scarce, so you cannot invest a lot of money into experiments. And the second thing is that
That's the innovation dilemma, no, in a way, because
yeah, that's
you need
the
to
big dilemma.
innovate in order to survive, but you cannot allocate too much money to that because otherwise the business as usual is, what gone.
Yeah, but what I argue is that they managed to solve this dilemma, finding a very nice compromise and going back to their roots, which is written journalism, words, well written articles, well reported articles, with some special occasions where they go multimedia, like elections or like the COVID pandemic, as you can see here in this area after 2020. And this prudence is something that I can see also here, if you want. Here, I did something which is highly experimental. I try to use an LDL algorithm to classify the articles from the word section into subject. And what you find here, let alone the limitations which I broadly discussed in this letter, so I'm not going to get into that unless you explicitly ask for it. But what you find, and what I find particularly interesting, is that instead of exploring and going toward and going where in parts of the world which are obviously underreported, I'm talking about particularly Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America.
Yeah.
For the last 20 years, the New York Times reported on the usual on the usual menu of Eurasian affairs, essentially, because there is everything. There is the nuclear proliferation. Of course, you have North Korea, but is residual. But we have a world which, for the New York Times, is essentially centered in Europe and the Middle East, with very little from other parts of the world.
Yeah, it's the American way of, looking after the world, in a way,
Yeah,
because yeah,
yeah, it
yeah,
is the traditional American way of looking at the
yeah,
world. But the problem is that we discovered that China is learning to be a superpower at least since 2004. Okay, round more or less, or at least since the Olympics in 2008. Okay, but the fact is that in the last 13 years, journalism did very little to adjust. In fact, if you go to see the classification of the sample of articles I've chosen, you see something that you see a very interesting trait of the world section of the New York Times, which is that the global affairs, as they are portrayed by a legacy media like the New York Times, are essentially a network of are essentially a game. I would say a zero sum game, okay, these six which moved within these six poles, and every time they were writing something, let's say about transatlantic relations, which means essentially the relationship between Europe and the States, they were writing something about nuclear proliferation, because Germany, France, and the European Union were essentially involved into the Iran nuclear deal. When they were talking about Russia, they were talking about also Afghanistan, maybe because they needed support for the war over there, also in logistical terms in Central Asia. When we are talking about Middle East affairs, we were talking about transatlantic relations because, you know, take the war in Syria and the fact that a lot of European militaries, including the Italian one, played a role over there. When you talk about Israel Palestine, you cannot avoid dealing with Russia, with generic Middle East, and also in nuclear proliferation, given the situation of Iran. So, how does it fit with the question that they didn't want to experiment? It fits perfectly, because in order to embrace the digital world, the New York Times did three things. It kept giving its reader the news they cared. I mean, New York, you cannot have to hide the fact that the New York Times is a local newspaper, and you saw it in the section animation. You see the section New York is extremely prominent. So uh, it's obvious that the New York Times sees the world from the New York perspective, hence from a very local one. But this is good because it's what their audience want, and it's
yeah,
what their audience are willing to pay, even if it's limiting. So they put together uh, um, a newspaper, a digital newspaper, which is perfectly in balance in terms of content, in terms of product innovation, and in terms of business model, which is essentially why they are thriving. And in my opinion,
are
it's
they
something that
indeed?
yes, they are. They are growing subscribers, and they are doing very well in terms of revenues and stuff. Um, there is something that it emerges and is something I didn't explicitly said in the newsletter, which is that if this is where legacy media is going, it is very good for the industry at all, because it means that we have strong media that work, and also uh, there is hope that this um, bloodshed in terms of jobs and value of the last 30 years can stop. We can hope that we can stop losing jobs and losing cash on journalism. But it also means that legacy media are still reporting a narrow part of the world, particularly when it comes to world affairs, and are still extremely narrow in the topics they give their readers, which means that there is a lot of room for startups, for freelancers and stuff like that, to to suggest and to pitch something different,
Yeah.
something that has never, something that wasn't done before. And this is something that gives you a lot of hope for what is about journalism. So if you have to do a balance of how journalism, of the direction that journalism took in 20 years, you can take this chart here and have a very good idea. There have been a decade of unknowns, chaos, and messy experiments that costed a shitload of money. And then you had a better idea of how you can make things work. And given that the New York Times essentially built the base mechanism to make a newspaper, to have a global newspaper working and having it sustainable, now it's the task to others to build upon this example and to evolve it also.
Yeah, and that was my final question. I mean, is there anything we can learn, we as European can learn from this from the New York Times? Is there something we can implement here as well in order
Yeah,
to try, as you say, they are trying?
the main lesson is to be faithful to ourselves, which can sound
It's so
mystical, but
it's like dating in a way.
yeah, it's like essentially like dating. I mean, you can pretend to be the Huffington. I mean, you can pretend the Huffington Post here in.
Yeah,
I mean, you can pretend to be the Huffington Post, but you are not. Okay, so it's like the two of us. I mean, we can pretend we are who is a very cool and good looking and hip. Okay, we can all pretend we are Sergio. No, we are Brad Pitt. Okay, but if you are, Sergio Mastroianni, you are Sergio Mastroianni. We cannot change. You cannot change
yeah,
our
indeed.
nature. Okay. No, and I'm saying so because Brad Pitt is like, the 21st century male Hollywood star, the stereotypical 21st century Hollywood star, whereas Marcello Mastroianni was something else from another age. But the problem is that uh, if Marcello Mastroianni tries to go the Brad Pitt way, it might look ridiculous. Okay, even in 2020. But if he stays Marcello Mastroianni, he can still look like a vintage piece of clothing, but he will never lose his charm.
Yeah.
And that's what news organization has to do: build upon what they do best, what is their specialization, and to make people pay for it.
So,
Without
so, so we should, in a way, work on our strength, not on our weaknesses. So we should focus on how to improve what we can do, what we are good at,
Yeah,
instead of.
exactly. So
Yeah.
take Italy. The Sole 24 Hours is extremely good in telling economy and studying the law.
Mm.
Essentially, studying the law, they are very good at it. So they should just do that and just do that and focus on that, and also to focus on insight, on data, and on everything else. But I mean, they need to. Newspapers need to focus on what the readers want from them, and what readers wanted from them for the last 50, 60 years. We cannot expect newspapers to be disrupted like this, because it doesn't work, because newspapers are cultural institutions with a legacy and with a tradition, and when you do innovation in this aspect, you have to consider that also. It's one of the many things you have to put together. Uh, and that's something that the Italian media was not very good at, actually, I think, because I mean, uh, there is a lot of number of reasons, but I don't think we have numbers. We have the time to do that. But I don't want also to talk about the Italian media. But if you think what happened in Italy, and also elsewhere in Europe, you saw that, you saw how digital media were embraced, and you see that in many cases the digital product had nothing to do with the print product. And this is one of the original mistakes of the mess we have on the European continent when it comes to journalism.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so
It's
the
a case
the
of
real issue here is to figure out how to best serve the readership, and how to do it in a way that they are not puzzled. Also because, I mean, multimedia content can be also quite difficult to manage for an older readership, and for a readership who is not socialized to that. And that's something that we have to face, and we don't discuss about it, also given the fact that the readership of legacy media is growing older. All right. So how do we innovate for people who who didn't grow up with a smartphone on their hand, in their hand? Is complicated.
yeah,
So the lesson is that the main lesson we have to take from that is to stay calm and to focus on what you do. And when you have a strong sales speech, you are essentially done. You can build on it and make money out of it.
yeah. So on this golden rule of journalists, not only of the journalists, but of journalists in general, we close here. We have here I mean, our meeting of this week, and of course, we'll be again on air next Tuesday. So thank you,
Yes.
Francesco, for being with us, and
Thanks for having me,
have a nice evening.
and see you soon. And yeah, we also need to tell our viewers that they need to save a date on October.
Yeah, yeah, for the Linux Day, but that will come, probably because we also need to get confirmation about date and time.
Ah, okay.
So not about, I think it's
Okay.
confirmed, but it's just not officially confirmed. So
Okay. So the third week, so we can say our viewers that they need to keep free the last week of October because they are working on something very cool.
yeah, indeed. So thank you again, Francesco, and
That's
good
it.
night. Good night. That's it.
I don't want to say anything more. Thank you.
Bye.
Good night, everybody. Ciao.
Bye.